It's Mailbag Friday on the podcast. We're going to get into several of your questions, including topics on Seiya Suzuki versus Michael Conforto as a potential free agent option for the Braves, as well as the closer role. Is AJ Minter an elite reliever now? And a lot more. Also, we're going to touch on Rob Manfred's comments from Thursday regarding the CBA negotiations. All that on a busy Friday episode of Locked On Braves. So let's get into it.
Hey, this is Stacey Gotsoulias,
DC Lundberg,
Ryan Finkelstein,
Taylor Blake Ward,
host of Locked On Yankees,
Locked On Mariners,
Locked On Mets,
Locked On Angels,
and you're listening to Locked On Braves.
Locked On Braves,
Locked On Braves,
part of the Locked On Podcast Network.
Hey, and welcome back to Locked On Braves, brought to you by the Locked On Podcast Network, where we are talking about your favorite teams every day. I am your host, Jake Mastriani. You can follow me on Twitter at ShortstopBall. Check out my bio there to see where I am covering the game of baseball, including the Atlanta Braves in written form over at TomahawkTake.com. Also, make sure you follow the podcast on Twitter at LockedOn_Braves so that you can be part of the show by submitting in your questions, feedback, what you would like to hear talked about on the podcast. Also, make sure you subscribe to us on YouTube and make sure you subscribe to us wherever you get your podcast. And thank you for making Locked On Braves your first listen each and every day. Right now, during the lockout, posting episodes 3 days a week. But once spring training does begin, hopefully soon, we'll get back to 5 days a week on the podcast. But still plenty of Braves content as we are going through this lockout together. It is a Mailbag Friday, so we're going to be handling your Twitter questions, talking about Seiya Suzuki, Michael Conforto, AJ Minter, Will Smith's job as the closer, and a lot more. We're going to be talking about the CBA negotiations as well with Rob Manfred's comments from Thursday. But let's jump into our first question here. This one from VT Murdoch, who says, what are your thoughts on Spencer Schwellenbach? And Spencer Schwellenbach, one of the top draft picks for the Atlanta Braves in last year's draft. And honestly, I don't know a ton about him because he had Tommy John surgery in the summer. So obviously didn't get to pitch this year and probably won't get to pitch for much of 2022 either. But just looking at his resume coming out of Nebraska as a two-way player, really he kind of seems like the type of player the Braves continue to take in the top rounds. Looking at Ryan Cusick and Jared Schuster, you know, they're all pretty similar in the fact that they have high upsides because they have some good, primary pitches and fastball with a good secondary pitch like a slider. But they also have very high floors, in my opinion, because they have high upsides as maybe potential 2-3 starters with the stuff that they have if they can develop into starters. But if not, I feel very comfortable that all of those can become very good high leverage relievers, which become very important in today's game. As I mentioned several times, being able to have those high leverage relievers. And, we've seen what happens with the Braves when they don't have them. And then when they do have them or they had them, they weren't pitching as well at the beginning of 2021 as they were in the postseason. But having those guys coming in, not just having, depth at starting pitching, which the Braves have, but when that starting pitching doesn't work out, being able to turn those players into relievers. And I think that's exactly what they have with Schwellenbach and with Cusick and with Schuster. They could potentially be very good starting pitchers, but you feel confident that if it doesn't work out in the starter's role, that they'll be very solid relievers. So I think that's kind of the same mold as what Schwellenbach is, has some potential as perhaps a number 2, number 3 starter if he continues to develop there. But if not, a very safe floor as a solid reliever at the back end of games. And BT also asked, what are your expectations of Will Smith? He said, or I said, first, it would take a lot, in my opinion, for Will Smith to lose his job. Look, if Snicker didn't take him out of that position in 2021, I think it'd be hard for him to do it in 2022. And Will Smith, to his credit, he's been very good for the most part with the Braves, 2020 notwithstanding, and that was a strange year to begin with. He had COVID coming into it as well, just like Freddie Freeman, and struggled out the gate and really just never kind of put it together there. But outside of that, Will Smith's actually been really good with the Braves. So, it's definitely his job until it isn't, and I think it would take a lot for that not to happen. Now, BT said if he struggles, what are some options for the Braves? And I think the Braves have some very solid options. I mean, we all thought AJ Minter would kind of be that heir apparent, to Craig Kimbrell as far as taking over that closer's role, and hasn't done that yet. And we're going to talk a little bit more about Minter later. But I think Tyler Matzik could get it done as well. The Braves brought in Kirby Yates, who maybe potentially by the end of 2022 could be ready to once again be in that closer's role. So they have some solid candidates if Will Smith doesn't work out, but I honestly think it's going to be Will Smith for duration of 2022 unless he just has a terrible season, and I just don't really see that happening. And then last question from VT, he said, could you evaluate the Weigel trade? Would it be great? It would be great to evaluate these trades from last season, and that is a good idea. I may go back and do some of that in another podcast, looking at all the trades moved from last season and kind of grade those out. And this is a trade. This is always a curious trade for me, more so from the Brewers side than the Braves side. But the Braves gave up Chad Sabatka and Patrick Weigel for Orlando Arcia. And look, Weigel and Sabatka could very well have some good seasons as big league relievers. I think they have, the type of stuff to get it done. It's just whether or not they can maintain their control. They both had terrible 2021 seasons with walk per nines over 5. So again, a lot of with them is the control, the command just didn't seem to be coming. Weigel obviously had the injuries, the setbacks. Sabatka had a very good year with the Braves, but never was able to repeat that. So, I didn't feel like the Braves gave up a ton in that. And I felt like they got a very, solid, capable major league infielder in Orlando Arcia. Now, he's a low average hitter. I know what he was doing at Gwinnett last year, and everybody was calling for him to take Dansby's job, and they eventually found a spot for him in the outfield when the Braves were desperate for outfielders. But he has pretty much proven at this point, he's still, relatively young, 27, going on 28 years old. So, I mean, perhaps there's room for more potential there, but he's shown majority of the time in his major league career, he's a below average hitter. But I do think he's very valuable as a backup infielder. If something were to happen to Dansby or Ozzie or Riley, I feel like he could fill in those spots and, at least give you a major league replacement level player. So I like having that depth of RC. I think that's why the Braves made that trade, just in anticipation of if something did happen to that infield. And luckily it didn't. And the infield pretty much played the entire year, which is great. And they ended up not needing him. But I think Arcia does give some value as, a backup infielder should the Braves need it. So good questions there from BT. One more before I take a break here. This one coming from Chris Shaffy on Twitter. He said, who is your favorite Braves closer and favorite Braves reliever? So the closer is pretty easy for me. I'm a huge Craig Kimbrell fan. That's kind of was the heightened of my Braves fandom growing up with Craig Kimbrell coming out of that bullpen. So I love Craig Kimbrell. He's probably always going to be one of my favorite closers for the Atlanta Braves. As far as favorite relievers go, a pretty close call here between Johnny Venters and Peter Moylan. It's probably going to be Johnny Venters. I mean, he was just so locked down and just such, a great reliever. Unfortunate all the injuries that he had. Same really for Peter Moylan. Moylan was more so just a fun, reliever to watch, and he was good with the Braves as well. But just the characteristics of Peter Moylan make him such a fun guy. Obviously doing pre and post game now for the Braves. But I'd probably say Kimbrell's my favorite closer, Venters favorite reliever for the Braves. But let me know what's your favorite. It's a good question from Chris. Let me know on Twitter, who's your favorite closer for the Braves all time? Again, my fandom really, starts mid-90s with the Braves. Obviously had Wohlers during that time, but Kimbrell, by far my favorite closer. But let me know who's your favorite closer and your favorite reliever for the Atlanta Braves. So good question there from Chris. This is the time of year that I've pretty much given up on all my New Year's resolutions, but not this year. I'm sticking to my resolution to eat right thanks to Built Bar. It almost feels like it's not really a resolution because I actually enjoy eating them. And have you tried their puffs? If you haven't, you're missing out on one of Built Bar's best tasting bars. Puffs are the first ever protein-infused marshmallow. They're fluffy, they're marshmallowy. They're not just a protein bar, they're a treat, and they're covered in 100% real chocolate. All Built Bars are covered in 100% real chocolate. And these are better. A typical candy bar can be anywhere from 200 to 300 calories. Go to built.com and scroll down to the macros chart. You'll be blown away by the high protein, low calorie, high fiber, low carb bars of Built Bar. And so many great flavors, from mint brownie, coconut almond. They got new flavors coming out all the time. They got the white chocolate cookies and cream right now, which is just delicious. At Built Bar, they are all about the taste. They make it taste delicious first, then figure out how to make it healthy. And I don't know how, but they pull it off every time. So go to built.com, use our promo code LOCKED15 and get 15% off your order. Again, use promo code LOCKED15 for 15% off at built.com. All right, I got a couple more questions here, and I apologize. There's some questions I'm not going to get to on today's podcast because I want to talk about these CBA negotiations and Rob Manfred's comments. I will get to those questions on Monday's podcast, but I do appreciate all the questions that were sent in. But the next one here comes from Jamar Baker 77, who says, is AJ Minter was a top 30 reliever according to F WAR, and his peripherals were even better than his actual numbers with a 2.69 FIP and 3.78 ERA. Will Minter emerge as a top 10 reliever in 2022? So this is a great question here from Jamar. Look, I briefly touched on it earlier. I think a lot of Braves fans thought AJ Minter was going to be that elite future closer for the Atlanta Braves, and he's flashed that at times, but just hasn't been able to do it consistently, back-to-back years yet. But the stuff's always been there for AJ to be an elite reliever, a closer type. That cutter is just absolutely filthy. Batters have not hit it the last 2 years, hitting well under 200 against that cutter the last 2 seasons. The speed differential between that cutter and his upper 90s fastball really keeps hitters off balance. The issue for him in the past, primarily in 2019, where he just kind of took a huge step back after a good 2018, what's his walk percentage. He had a walk percentage of 15.6 in 2019. In 2020, he improved that to 10.6% and was pretty lights out in 2020. And then this past year, he brought it down even further to 9%. And there's probably a little bit more room for growth there. Would love to see him get it, make an improvement on that in 2022 as well, get it down to 8%. But that's honestly, the biggest thing that's held him back. The StatCast numbers, the average exit velocity against him, all of that, that's always been there. It's really just been the walk percentage that has held him back from being elite. If he continues to keep that, below 10%, maybe can even get it down to 8%, then I don't see why he can't be an elite reliever. I don't know, he'll be in the top 10, depending on how you define, a top 10 reliever. I think Will Smith's going to get the majority of the saves. And obviously Minter has competition with Tyler Matzik as well, who I think could be, an elite reliever himself in 2022. But it wouldn't surprise me at all if Minter, starts to take over that closer role in 2022 and going into 2023, the role we all thought, he would play for the Braves. So, yeah, I mean, like you said, I think he's already top 30. It would not surprise me if he jumped into top 15, maybe top 10, but I'm definitely looking for big things for AJ Minter in 2022. All right, and then final question here on today's podcast. Wendy Junior 10 L Wendy on Twitter said, Seiya Suzuki or Michael Conforto, who should the Braves bring to the team, or is there better? And I'm just going to stick it between these two right now. I think that's a great question. I think it's a great comparison to kind of look at between Seiya Suzuki and Michael Conforto. Look, Seiya is the more exciting of the two, obviously, because it's a bit unknown. He could come in and be an absolute monster. And, the next Japanese star like Shohei Ohtani. But it's an unknown, and there's a lot of risk involved there. He's probably going to get, a pretty sizable contract. 27 years old right now. Look, it's an exciting thought. I don't think the Braves are really in the running, and I don't think they're going to spend the money that it would require to get him. I would still choose Michael Conforto, though. Maybe that comes as a surprise to some of you, but I would actually choose Conforto. He's a bit of a more known commodity, and he's a left-handed bat, which plays big for me because I think the Braves need more left-handers in their lineup. Even if they bring Freddie Freeman back, which they will, they still need more lefties in that lineup. The only other lefty is Ozzy Albies when he bats lefty, and we all know he hits better as a righty. So I like Conforto having the lefty bat. I think it's the potential that Seiya Suzuki could be exactly what Conforto is, and a 250, 260 hitter, with good on base numbers and 25 to 30 home runs. I mean, I think that's a pretty, fair comparison as far as Conforto and Suzuki. So I think they could be close, production wise. Obviously, there's again the unknown with Suzuki. He could come over here be an absolute star, but those, based on some of the projections that I've seen for him, it's pretty comparable to Conforto, and I think you can get Conforto a lot cheaper than you will Suzuki. So I would go with Conforto between those two for the Braves. BetOnline has you covered this season with more props, odds, and lines than ever before as football continues its march through the playoffs with the Super Bowl coming up this weekend. BetOnline.net remains the best spot for all your sports scores, podcasts, and news this season. And it's not just football. BetOnline has up-to-the-minute info on pro and college hoops, NHL, boxing, UFC, along with live real-time updates of current games. Don't wait to take advantage of all the new amazing offers available for the 2022 season. BetOnline, where the game starts. All right, so I wanted to wrap up talking about Rob Manfred's press conference on Thursday. A couple of keynotes coming out of there. One is that the DH rule is official. He pretty much announced that both sides have agreed to that. So something we've known coming for a while, but certainly looks like it is going to be official that the DH will be coming to the National League. I wrote an article on TomahawkTake.com the other day about the best internal options. Look, if Marcell Ozuna's on the team, he is the DH, and he thrived in that role in 2020. So, I'm confident that he will be able to thrive there again, if he's part of the Braves. And I'm thinking that at this point he will be. So Marcell Ozuna seems like an obvious candidate to fill that DH role for the Braves. No more draft pick compensation tied to free agent qualifying offers may have been the bigger announcement. We all knew the DH was coming, but the fact that both sides have agreed to that is pretty huge news, meaning that, when you have a team that loses a player to free agency, or is a player that's going into free agency, and you give them that qualifying offer and they sign with another team, you're no longer going to get that draft pick compensation. That's not going to hold those free agents back from signing with other teams, and good for like the Braves as well. If we're going after those players, like Will Smith, and not having to give up that pick, that's big for the Braves too. So no more draft pick compensation tied to free agents with qualifying offers. Pretty big deal there. Manfred said it would be disastrous for the regular season not to start on time, which is one thing I can agree with him on. Says spring training is still on schedule, but there's almost no way that starts on time, with pitchers and catchers expected to originally expected to report around the 15th or 16th. So I still think spring training gets delayed, but at least he and I think both sides recognize it would be disastrous if the regular season does not start on time. And I think both sides understand the importance of getting a deal done before then. I just wonder how much time they're going to leave to finish up free agency and to get as many spring training games in as possible. Because like I said, I think that could be a detriment to the pitchers if they don't get at least 4 or 5 weeks of spring training to get their arms ready for the regular season. Rob Manfred said they need about a week once a deal is done to get spring training started. Again, I guess you could do that and still have the offseason going on while spring training is starting, but I just don't like the rushedness of spring training, and that scares me a ton. The owners will have another proposal for the players on Saturday, and it better be good because, like I said, they got to get a deal done within the next 2 weeks in order to try to have somewhat of a normal spring training. And that will do it for this episode of Locked On Braves. Be sure to follow us on Twitter at LockedOn_Braves. You can follow me at Shortstop Ball. Also, make sure you subscribe to the podcast wherever you get your podcast, and we will talk to you next time.